Hi there, thanks for joining me today. My name is Matt Creep. I'm a senior technical product marketer here at Veeam. And today we're going to talk security readiness best practices with the Veeam data platform, Veeam 12. So with the release of the V12 platform, we wanted to take the time to share some security best practices. This session is broken down into guidance that any IT department can use right now, regardless of whether or not you're a Veeam customer. We'll also be touching on some best practices and enhancements available with the V12 platform release. At the end of the day, we want to ensure that you have a secure and cyber resilient infrastructure. I'm sure many of us have been in a situation. An audit has been performed, or maybe new tools have been deployed. Findings are then reviewed and corrective actions are taken when needed. Unfortunately, the process typically stops right there. Security is something that needs to be continually revisited and reviewed. It should not be an action which was just taken once and then forgotten about. As threat vectors increase and methods of intrusion become more sophisticated, we're seeing situations where security is just being thwarted. In some cases, it's a matter of a fix is available, but just hasn't been applied yet. At the end of the day, the risks and threats to your environment are relentless. Having a strong and up-to-date security posture is one of the biggest defenses against attackers. But what worked as a defense yesterday may not actually work today. When it comes to protecting your infrastructure, you'll hear most security professionals recommend a layered defense approach or defense in depth. The reason for this is that rarely can one measure protect your environment. It requires security each step along the way. A great example is spam. We're all used to getting unsolicited messages, and enterprises have implemented spam filtering to help this, but rarely is it 100% accurate. Sometimes legitimate messages are flagged. Other times, spam gets through. That's where user education comes in, another layer of defense, teaching users some tips to identify legitimate messages. The point I'm driving at here is that attackers have essentially an unlimited number of tries to break in and wreak havoc. Meanwhile, your defenses have to be 100% accurate each and every time. And for those situations where you don't stop them, you need to make sure you catch their activity immediately. This is why security teams are investing in instant response tools and services to react faster once a breach is detected. A measurement of success, however, is the ability to restore your data from a reliable backup and to ensure that the attack has been contained. Containing the breach and proving you have not lost data means there's no need to pay a ransom and hope that your data is recoverable. The bottom line is having a trusted and immutable backup as a last line of defense allows you to be resilient when all other defenses fail. When it comes to securing your data center, the common challenges we typically see fall under one of these silos. Since 2020, we've seen a massive surge in the amount of business-related traffic being performed online. This has pushed a lot of organizations to strive for zero tolerance for downtime. Unfortunately, in order to accomplish this, complex, highly available, and fault-tolerant infrastructure is often needed. Costs aside, this could present its own set of challenges for situations that involve host patching and reboots, for example. And how about threats? Whether automated attacks or malicious threat actors, enterprises of all sizes routinely find themselves trying to keep the attackers at bay. Threats are also getting more sophisticated, with some cases seeing malicious code remaining dormant for days, weeks, or even months. This could bring up challenges with keeping your backup safe. Things such as, how long do you keep your data for to ensure that it's clean? How do you cope with the rising costs of keeping that data longer? And how are you protecting that data from attackers? Compliance is another big issue for customers. There might be restrictions on not only how long you need to keep your data, but also where can you keep your data. There might be locality rules which limit which cloud providers you can be using. Regulations such as GDPR add complications when dealing with challenges such as securely storing data, but you still have to adhere to requirements like the right to be forgotten. In some instances, You also need to know if you are able to meet your SLAs for recovery point and recovery time. Reliably measuring your current performance can be tricky at best. How about times when we do have to recover, right? During incidents, it could be difficult to get the resources that you need. People will be pulled all over the place. Or maybe it's a matter of you just don't have the actual compute or storage resources required. The last thing you want to have someone say during an incident is, I think this will work, right? Maybe it's a matter of you can't get the pro that you need on the line to help you with this, or maybe the person doesn't have the right training. And with growing data sets, restore times are increasing. So you need to be able to develop a strategy to restore just what you need. That granularity is key. You don't want to restore an entire database when you just need one table. Lastly, remote users. These could be what I like to think of as sleeper entry points into your corporate network. Since 2020, we saw a huge spike in work from home. Today, we're starting to see a little bit of a pendulum swing back to a bit more of a hybrid approach. But at the end of the day, there's going to be that new work from anywhere scenario in most organizations. How do we deal with that? How do you deal with a customer or your end user who is sitting in a coffee shop somewhere on that Wi-Fi? How do you stop a laptop from infecting the rest of your network? So what can we take away from all these? For one, workloads are spread all over the place. Hybrid cloud is here and it's real. If you experience a security incident, you might need to pivot. If your servers are seized by law enforcement as part of an investigation, are you able to shift your workloads to the cloud? Will you have access to your backups? Do you have playbooks to actually orchestrate the recovery? Ransomware brings about its own challenges as well. So according to our research, 85% of organizations have admitted to having a substantial ransomware incident in 2022. That number, although not surprising, it's quite high. More concerning of that is that only 19% of those companies were able to recover their data without paying the ransom. We want to make sure that our Veeam customers are 100%. But even more concerning is that of those companies who chose to pay the ransom, about a third of them didn't recover their data. We are talking about criminals after all. It shouldn't be a shock that they aren't trustworthy. Every one of these companies had some form of disaster recovery plan, but they fell short recovering their data because their existing backup solution wasn't designed to function at the scale of a ransomware attack. Those who have managed backups in the past are likely aware of the 3-2-1 rule. The 3-2-1 rule says that there should be at least 3 copies of your important data on at least 2 different types of media, with at least one of those copies being offsite. Although this strategy is still the gold standard for protecting your data, modern malware is known to attack the backup layer. So you need to have a process in place to ensure resilience. That's why we created the 3-2-1-1-0 rule for data recovery. We recommend that in addition to the 3-2-1 rule, at least one copy of your data be resilient, either through being air-gapped, offline, or immutable. This is imperative for effectively defending yourself against ransomware. We've also added a 0 to the rule because automated backup verification ensures that your data is valid and usable for recovery. You cannot recover data that has been captured incorrectly, and ultimately you need to make sure that you have 0 errors. Testing and verification is never a fun task though, and is unfortunately one that gets skipped all too often. Common complaints and concerns usually revolve around the time needed to orchestrate recovery tests, or the lack of capacity or resources in the environment to use for testing. We'll dive into that a little bit later when I start talking about Sure Backup, as well as how we could perform tests at scale. So as mentioned previously, one of the first steps to developing a successful cyber resiliency strategy for your data is to have a secure and protected environment. This includes your production workloads such as enterprise applications, virtual machines, physical servers, and of course, your backups. To start things off, let's talk about physical security. Some of this may seem like common sense, but malicious threat actors routinely gain access to networks by exploiting a gap in physical security. A great example is a situation where a threat actor shows up at an office under the guise of delivering packages. It's easy enough to place large boxes on the receptionist desks, and behind the stack and out of view, a USB thumb drive might be inserted into the receptionist's computer. Now, in this example, physically securing that front desk machine from easy access could be something as simple as mounting it out of reach under the desk. Similarly, some organizations go as far as disabling USB ports in the computer's BIOS, maybe physically disconnecting them from the motherboard, or even filling the slots with something like epoxy. Although this may sound extreme, it could be a good countermeasure to combat situations when a network system is exposed. Similarly, other steps such as physically locking server racks, server rooms, or offices in general can assist with this. For areas that are restricted, such as server rooms or data centers, make sure that access is limited. Not only should this access be limited, but should be regularly reviewed for changes. All too often, HR departments do not notify security or IT employees of who left. Similarly, it should be evaluated if the user on the list actually requires access, and if so, can or should this access be limited to specific areas. Lastly, when building this list, also consider who may require access during an incident. If a DR event is invoked, you do not want to find out that your primary contact is unavailable and your secondary contact is not on the authorized users list. If possible, surveillance options such as video cameras should be considered, particularly for public and sensitive areas. Think spots like the front desk reception. These would hopefully capture threat actors who try to social engineer their way into the office. Other areas, such as server rooms or parking lots, should be monitored. The latter is important should there be a need to identify a vehicle associated with an incident. It's also important to review the data such as footage and access logs, even when there are no known incidents. This can help verify that only approved staff are accessing resources at valid times. The last thing you want to see is why is someone accessing the server room at 11:30 when there was no changes scheduled. And let's not forget remote or branch offices. Typically, these would be smaller in size, both physically and from a headcount perspective. This often means that the same resources that head office has, such as dedicated server rooms or security equipment, may not be available there. In many cases, larger offices are given the gold treatment by security. They will have not only physical security systems in place, but likely tools like intrusion detection and prevention systems. Branch offices quite often will not have these, but they may still have unfettered access back to the large offices via VPNs. So consider treating each office as a different security zone or domain. All traffic passing back and forth should be analyzed and monitored. In the event of a breach at a branch office, having the ability to quickly compartmentalize and cut off access can save the business from significant damages. Think about securing your infrastructure, right? You want to make a secure foundation by default. There are many tools available today from a hardware perspective, even within the server itself. Tools such as the Trusted Platform module. These have been usable in VMware vSphere ESXi since about 6.7. Similarly, are you able to actually store your data encrypted at rest on your storage system? For out-of-band management, for things such as IPMI, IDRAC, ILO, make sure that you isolate those network interfaces. You want to make sure that they are on a separate management network, something that someone from accounting can access. And as with many things, apply the principle of least privilege on these interfaces. If you're using something such as Active Directory, make sure that if you're assigning an Active Directory group to log in, that everyone in that group should actually have access. Isolate and encrypt network traffic. Right? Consider what, if any, encryption is needed for traffic on your network. Should your backup jobs be sending encrypted traffic? Similarly, if you're using network services such as SSH, ensure that strong algorithms are being used. Many of us who have been in the industry for a while might remember this. Back when virtual machines really started gaining popularity, There's quite often a little bit of a different mindset behind them. They were almost treated a little bit more disposable, for lack of a better word, because of how easy they were to create. That can lead to inconsistencies from a lifecycle standpoint. So what I'm getting at here is that you should treat virtual workloads much the same that you would a physical workload. So think things such as OS patches, security updates, configurations. At the same time, even the hardware. Are there new firmware releases that should be put out there, or drivers that might plug a security hole? When possible, use hardened templates, whether or not that's physical or virtual. Make sure that the workloads you're deploying are secure by default versus having to go back and apply security after the fact. Lastly, make sure that you remove any unneeded components. Things such as, are you running IIS on a server that has no reason to have it running on there? From a password standpoint, consider using passphrases. These are generally longer than what you might be able to remember, but they're easier to remember. It could be something such as some lyrics from your favorite song, toss a number on there, put an exclamation mark in there. At the end of the day, it could be easier to remember, but it'll be longer and more complex than an 8 or 10 character password. Also consider using some sort of password manager. At the enterprise level, there are many options available. Some will let you actually check out passwords or auto-rotate them for you. On the personal side, you could check out, there's many different options available, and they could do things such as auto-generate passwords for you. So each website that you sign up for can have its own unique password. The best part is you don't need to remember that password. Password manager takes care of it for you. And because you're using unique passwords for each system, if one of them gets compromised, none of the others are at risk. Shifting gears to a Veeam perspective, you'll want to understand your availability requirements. One of the challenges I called out earlier was around achieving zero downtime. This can be critical for business-related workloads, such as e-commerce systems. When developing an incident response plan, you should consider what security workloads need to be protected as well. For example, do you have a network intrusion prevention system that requires high-level availability? You'll want to make sure those are back up and running as soon as possible to ensure that the breach has been contained. For instances such as this, continuous data protection is a tool to consider. CDP allows administrators to create a very granular restore interval down to seconds by leveraging continuous replication. This level of protection is typically reserved for critical workloads which need extremely low recovery point or recovery time objectives. Because we don't know how far back we need to recover from, for example, if we don't know a system was infected with ransomware, CDP allows you to configure both short-term retention points as well as long-term retention points. So this really gives you the flexibility to roll back to a wide range of recovery points. One of the great things about this feature is the ability to easily measure if you're hitting your SLA targets. If you start missing your replication points, Veeam backup and replication will start to generate warnings. If you are incorporating cloud into your strategy, Veeam Recovery Orchestrator can handle replication and workload recovery for you. One of the great things about this tool is you can use the at-a-glance dashboards to actually see if you're hitting your desired RPOs and RTOs. From a technology point of view, this feature leverages VMware vSphere's APIs for I/O filtering, also known as VIO. These filters allow partners, such as Veeam, to read virtual machine data with little to no impact on performance. And these APIs and this usage is also completely supported by VMware. Trusted immutability. If you're not familiar with what the term immutability is, it relates to storage and essentially means that once data is written to disk, it cannot be erased or altered until a specified period of time has lapsed. So why is this an important feature? Well, simple. It prevents any changes from being written to your backup files. Let's use ransomware as an example. Once the malicious code makes its way onto your network, it will start encrypting any data it can find. If it somehow finds its ways to your backup repository, then your backups will be inaccessible as they'll be encrypted. Unless They are sitting on immutable storage, in which case the ransomware will not be able to alter those files and therefore will not be able to encrypt them. Similarly, if you have a rogue employee looking to cause damage, immutable storage would prevent them from deleting the data. Veeam Data Platform has many different ways to support immutability in many different locations. This flexibility allows you to use immutability where you see fit, all the while not locking you into specific vendors. With V12, immutability is supported on the enhanced Linux hardened repository, through object storage that supports S3 object lock technology, and through many different cloud partners or service providers. So let's talk about the Linux hardened repository a bit more in V12. First off, deploying a Linux hardened repository has never been simpler. The process is streamlined with the intent of making it more accessible for organizations or teams which may not have the skills or time to properly manage deployments. The process will still be using single-use credentials to provide an additional layer of security. Lastly, those of you with sharp eyes will notice that there is no option to turn immutability off. These repositories will only support immutability. The traditional Linux repository with mutable storage is still available though. Additionally, we have the ability to write backups directly to object storage. Enterprises of all sizes are interested in object storage as it can solve numerous problems. Scaling file systems is near infinite with this, which removes any concerns around long-term growth. The data is highly durable when compared to traditional file systems. And lastly, immutability. It could be simple and straightforward to implement. Previously, object storage was limited to scale-up backup repositories as part of the archive or capacity tiers. However, with V12, you can now write backups directly to object storage. Similar to some of the benefits we've already seen today, the new direct-to-object storage repositories support immutability as well by utilizing the S3 object lock feature. Additionally, restore points will be protected for the entire retention period. So if you want to leverage this for long-term retention when using something like a grandfather, father-son policy. The direct-to-object storage is also a great alternative for situations where teams may not have the required or desired level of Linux knowledge. Object storage provides a simple and low overhead method for implementing immutability. For situations that require immutable storage at enterprise scale, scale-up backup repositories can be used to achieve this. By using S3 compatible object storage or an Azure blob with immutability as the backing storage for these repositories, immutability can be set as part of the policy. When object storage is being used, immutability is achieved by using the same reliable native S3 object lock feature that we talked about already. Capacity tiers can leverage S3 compatible storage, whether on-site or in the cloud. As a piece of advice though, when enabling any sort of immutability, ensure that you check and double check your calculations. The last thing that you want to do is put a policy in place, say for 60 days of immutability, only to run out of space partway through. You would then be stuck with a repository which has run out of storage with no easy way to clear out the space. Adding additional storage to the repository might be one solution. However, it's not necessarily something that can be done quickly, easily, or without financial cost associated with it. From an access and authentication standpoint, the console for Veeam Backup and Replication V12 includes additions which will help organizations meet their security and compliance needs. First off will be the ability to use multi-factor authentication. Setup is as simple as a single checkbox. After enabling that, the next time a user tries to log on, they will be prompted to set up MFA on the device. Authenticators such as Microsoft Authenticator are fully supported. The process is as simple as scanning the QR code, entering the code from the app. Once verified, the user will be prompted for their MFA code each time they log on. Should you have a service accounts in use, MFA can be disabled for specific accounts. Additionally, if MFA is enabled, security groups cannot be used as part of the users and roles setup. When taking a layered security approach, though, it is also highly recommended that the OS on which Veeam backup and replication is running be secured as well with MFA. Third-party solutions such as Duo can be used to assist in ensuring that only valid users are accessing the VPR server in the first place. Additionally, we also introduced support for group managed service accounts. So application-aware image processing is an important feature to ensure that data is backed up reliably. In short, it's a process that interacts with the guest OS to ensure that accurate and healthy restore points in time copies of an application is captured as part of the backup. A common example would be a database application. If application-aware processing is not used, then the crash-consistent backup is created. This is generally the equivalent of copying everything that has been written to disk. The problem, though, comes in the form of applications which may still have data in memory. By using application-aware processing, Veeam is able to interact with guest OS and request a volume shadow copy snapshot, which can then be used to quiesce the application's memory and commit all outstanding in-memory writes to disk. In order to do this, guest OS credentials need to be provided for the interaction. With V12, group managed service accounts will be used, which will allow for ad hoc queries to Active Directory for credentials. Similar to the single-use credentials, which we talked about earlier, GMSA does not store passwords within the Veeam. Additional benefits of using GMSA accounts include strong 240-byte randomly generated complex passwords. This makes brute force obviously much more ineffective. And lastly, we've also got, passwords are regularly and automatically changed every 30 days. New in V12 is the built-in best practices analyzer. The analyzer, which can be run on demand, will check for common misconfigurations and advise you as to what is violating a best practice. By being able to run it on demand, you can make required changes, such as enabling or disabling services and rerun it. Depending on the organizational requirements, backup administrators may be able to use these findings to assist with audits and compliance requirements, which might be set up by their internal security teams. A handy note about this feature, as mentioned, these checks are performed at runtime. So if you make changes, you can immediately rerun the analyzer to see the impact and make sure that things are rectified. On a related note, to compliance requirements set forth by security teams, V12 introduces increased Kerberos support. As security becomes more and increasingly top of mind, we're seeing lots of increased requirements coming forth from both customer-driven security teams as well as third-party cyber insurance requirements. For environments that leverage Active Directory as part of their identity management strategy, the widened Kerberos support will provide yet another layer of security. Applying best practices and secure configurations is just one component when it comes to building a strong risk management plan. Having the tools to identify threats early is key to minimizing the impact when a threat does make its way onto your network. Veeam 1, which is part of the Veeam Data Platform Advanced, is designed to provide monitoring and analytics to IT professionals and business insight to key stakeholders. It is also an integral part of the Veeam Data Platform when it comes to identifying threats and working towards containment and remediation. Out of the box, Veeam 1 provides comprehensive alerting when telltale signs of malicious activity are detected. Alarms can be triggered and administrators can be alerted when possible ransomware activity is detected. When it comes to monitoring your data and protecting it from risk, Veeam 1 can assist administrators in multiple ways. Alerts can be set up for identifying unusual network performance. So in cases where large amounts of data are being transferred to or from a machine in question, alerts can be configured to advise administrators. These spikes could be caused by intruders trying to exfiltrate data outside of the network which could be a precursor to a data breach. Because all workloads are different, building customized reports based on metrics such as data store write IO or memory usage can assist with identifying anomalies, which then can be investigated. Another very handy report built into Veeam 1 is the Protected VMs report. It's useful for seeing what is protected at a glance, but just as useful is the unprotected portion of the report. With this, you could quickly identify VMs that are not being backed up. This is a great report to hand over to application owners to ensure that they are aware of any protected workloads and to remediate if necessary. As a quick example, in this report snapshot, we see that there are 93 unprotected VMs. In addition to a report such as this, you can also pull a list of unprotected VMs. As per my point earlier, you could take those unprotected VMs, go back and say, hey, should these be protected? When ransomware attacks, it encrypts files, which exist within the guest OS. Because these files are drastically changed, they typically have the byproduct of creating suddenly large backup files. Veeam 1 has built-in report to help identify and alert when incremental backup file sizes seemingly increase drastically in size. Because encryption is a CPU-heavy task, high CPU usage levels can be another indicator of a problem, particularly when there's a large volume of disk writes occurring at the same time. When these two actions occur for any extended period of time, Veeam 1's possible ransomware activity alarm can go off, notifying administrators. These alarms can all be customized and tweaked to fine-tune things like CPU usage threshold, data store write rates, network transmit rates, as well as specifying a length of time to monitor for. Furthermore, you can actually create multiple versions of these alerts to apply to different scopes of workloads. You may have some workloads, for example, that experience high CPU spikes routinely, so you may not want to monitor network and data store stats, or you may only want to monitor those. Or the inverse might be true if you have an application which heavily uses network bandwidth. At the end of the day, it's important to cut down on as many false positives as possible. We've all experienced the alert fatigue, right? We get so many false positives that we stop verifying whether or not an incident has actually occurred. By creating customized and tailored alerts for your various workloads, you can obtain an increased level of confidence and visibility. We've already touched on immutability and why it could be such a strong asset when it comes to protecting your data. In Veeam 1 V12, there's a new immutable workload report, which will allow you to quickly identify which of your backup jobs are or are not storing their backup files on immutable storage. The breakdown will include details such as overall number of workloads protected or not protected by immutability, total number of restore points stored on immutable storage, as well as just totals by workload type. In a perfect world, all of your backups would be locked away safely on immutable storage. However, this isn't always possible in the real world. This report can help you identify what backups are at the greatest risk, and if need be, you can use it to have that discussion point when it comes time to review your protection strategy with the key stakeholders. With the addition of direct-to-object backup in Veeam Backup and Replication V12, there is a lot of customer excitement as S3 object lock will make the path to immutability all that much easier. With that in mind, Veeam 1 will be expanding many of its existing reports to fully evaluate and embrace immutability. We've talked about ransomware detection and leveraging immutability, but what we haven't touched on is malicious insiders. Regular auditing of jobs is an important step when it comes to providing a strong security stance. Being alert about a job's success or failure is something that many of us take for granted. An email may show up, we see that the job is successful, and we move on with our day. An area that many professionals don't spend a lot of time on is auditing for changes. Being able to pull a list of when a backup job was altered and by who is something that should be done regularly as well. If a VM was removed from a job, it's important to understand who did that and why. Fortunately, Veeam has multiple audit jobs built into it as well. So I've been talking a lot about identifying threats, typically from ransomware or a threat actor. However, there is one threat that the vast majority of organizations are aware of, but don't do enough about. I'm referring to testing your backups regularly. An untested backup isn't really a backup. After all, ultimately, it's the recovery that we care about. The worst time to realize that your backup has failed is during a crisis when you're trying to restore that data. In short, backups are easy, but recovery is hard. And what I mean by that is there are a multitude of things that could go wrong during a recovery. Maybe application and word processing wasn't turned on and critical database information was missed. Another great example might be a pending OS reboot due to a patch installation. If a crash consistent backup was taken, the OS may not actually boot up properly because of this. In short, your recovery is a critical step and one that is unfortunately skipped all too often. Back in 2010, Veeam introduced a feature called Sure Backup, and its premise is simple. Take your backups and perform a full-fledged restore in a sandbox environment. As part of the process, VMs are booted up and customized tests can actually be run against them to ensure that the VM is behaving as expected. For example, if you have an Active Directory server, tests can be run to ensure that services such as DNS and VMware tools are responding after a test restore. In the event that you have dependencies like, say, a web server, a database server, and a domain controller, application groups can actually be created to bring all three up at once and test. If that isn't enough for you, there's also the ability to add your own custom testing scripts to the process. Once all of this is run in an automated fashion, the VMs are spun down, all changes are discarded so that your backups are back to their original state and a job completion alert is created. Testing our backups isn't something that many folks would consider fun, but with Sure Backup, a lot of this can be automated for you. Earlier on, we covered best practices around keeping your backup secure. That's the first step in ensuring a successful recovery, data security. After all, if your backups are compromised, you have nothing to recover from. And we just wrapped up the importance of detecting risks. These risks range from ransomware holding your data hostage to an insider threat slowly sabotaging your recovery. Or lastly, maybe your own worst enemy, an untested backup. Next, let's shift gears and talk about the most important part of any backup plan, the recovery. Without a proven way to recover, everything else is a bit of a moot point. So many of you might be familiar with Veeam's recovery scenarios graphic, right? In V11, we were up to 91 ways to get your data back. With V12, we were up to 105 ways to get your data back. That's a lot of different ways, but also just as important is where we can restore back to. Data freedom is something that is top of mind for a lot of enterprises. Why is it so important? Well, for starters, nobody wants to be locked into a specific cloud or a specific hardware vendor or even a specific software vendor. Having the ability to choose where your data is restored to is one of Veeam's strengths and is something that we are continually innovating on. Sometimes we might have to restore to a new location with very short notice. Many people are surprised to learn that during a ransomware attack, law enforcement can seize an entire data center as evidence. It essentially creates that smoking hole scenario, but you still see the building. Scenarios like this are why it's important to understand how Veeam's data mobility approach can get you back up and running quickly. Additionally, this data freedom is not just restricted to virtual machines. For example, the Veeam data platform has the ability to take a backup of a physical machine created by Veeam Agent and restore it to Microsoft Azure. This in itself has many implications. For example, if your physical host has been seized or has experienced a hardware failure, you don't need to wait for that replacement host to arrive to get your workload back up and running. If your organization is looking at a cloud migration strategy, restoring The backup to the cloud can be an easy win. You'll be able to see, can this actually run in the cloud? What's the performance like? And it can help you get that networking and piping in place as part of the plan. At the end of the day, proper recovery planning is key. When it comes time to develop, test, and execute an entire DR plan, things can get really complex. The number one way to mitigate this risk is via testing and automation. As I mentioned earlier, the worst time to realize your backups failed is during a crisis. Sadly, a crisis also seems to be the time when teams realize that there are holes in the recovery plan. Sure, backup is a great way to test a subset of your backups, but there are many other components involved with truly testing and verifying your recovery strategy. Tasks such as creating documentation or performing full restores at scale, all while measuring your recovery time objective. Testing, verification, automation, and orchestration are requirements to ensure fast, secure, and reliable recovery. Unfortunately, many organizations do not have the resources readily available to cover these requirements. With Veeam Recovery Orchestrator V6, you have the ability to maintain a comprehensive recovery plan and stress test that plan to give you and your leadership the confidence in your strategy. Veeam Recovery Orchestrator is designed to be a vital tool in your tool belt when it comes to addressing the challenges and ensuring that your recovery is fast and secure. It leverages best practices that we've talked about with Veeam Backup Replication and Veeam 1, and it takes things to the next level. From the disaster recovery perspective, Veeam Recovery Orchestrator can create dynamic documentation or update existing documentation for all your DR plans. Additionally, Veeam data labs are leveraged for zero impact testing, which allows you to fully restore plans in a completely sandboxed environment. This means that you can reliably test your recovery time objective to know with confidence that you will be able to meet your SLAs. When it comes to orchestration, custom tasks and sequences can be defined, allowing you to bring workloads up in a specific order and restore to specific locations, whether it's the original location, such as an on-prem vSphere installation, or a new location, such as within Azure. Flexibility with regards to restore locations is a key requirement when it comes to DR, as we can't assume that the source location is still available. Using Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, plans can be created bringing workloads up in net new locations. Features such as Cloud DR will let you restore virtual machines or workloads protected by Veeam Agent directly into Azure in the event that your physical data center or just the original hardware is unavailable. In the event that you have ample capacity within your vSphere environment, Orchestrator can automatically recover your physical agent workloads directly into vSphere if you wish. Lastly, to ensure that you are not restoring backup containing the threat, as we talked about earlier, we don't always know when the threat was introduced. CleanDR can actually scan restore points as part of the recovery process. You could go through there, perform a scan, and if the threat is found, it will go back to the previous restore point in order to ensure that you're getting clean data back. We've talked a lot about defense in depth, right? There are a lot of companies who talk about their bells and whistles, but avoid the topic of recovery because they can't do it fast, it's not reliable, and it can't be done at scale. And let's face it, if you can't recover your data, nothing else matters. You're going to have a lot of challenges when hit with ransomware. So we are going to focus on capabilities that you need to really use to get your data back into production. There's a lot more we can do, and if it makes sense, we'll dive into it. But to be successful at recovery, you need to have the ability to set the right recovery options for your applications. You need to make sure that you have total control over the entire recovery process. Multi-layered immutability is important. Make sure that your workloads are protected, whether it's backing up your physical workloads to an immutable storage through Veeam Agent. Make sure that you have complete data mobility. Your data needs to be able to move wherever is available at the time of disaster. Throughout all this, you need to make sure that you have comprehensive monitoring, not just from a prior to the attack perspective and looking out for trouble, but it's also important as part of the recovery process that you make sure that things are progressing smoothly. And lastly, simplicity through automation. If you are able to automate something, it's repeatable and less prone to errors. Backup and recovery is critical, and it's not enough anymore. Advanced capabilities to monitor, measure, automate, and orchestrate are all next list of top priorities for many companies and backup and recovery strategies. And as companies are looking for more sophisticated data protection, they look to Veeam. We provide organizations with data resiliency through secure backup and fast, reliable recovery solutions for their hybrid clouds. We integrate seamlessly with AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, and we offer native backup and application mobility for Kubernetes. We also have integrations with some of your most data-intensive SaaS workloads, such as Microsoft 365 or Salesforce. And with that, we're approaching the end of the webinar here. I'll take a couple of minutes here to go through some of the questions that came through. So the first one goes back to Sure Backup. I always get lots of questions around that. So yes, I mentioned that it allows for custom testing. You can actually get a lot more information around the scripts that you can write, how you can leverage these scripts and so forth in one of our KBs, KB 1312. So you could do things like create variables for things like IP addresses so that you could customize what you're actually trying to test for. Next up is Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. How can it accurately predict my RPOs and RTOs? So this is one of the really cool things I like about VRO is as part of the testing, I mentioned it'll spin up a sandbox environment. And what that means is it's not just a matter of, oh, this is how long we think it will take to perform this restore. It's really a matter of, no, we're actually performing this restore in a segregated environment, so you don't need to worry about it impacting production, but we're performing it on the storage that you're using or that you would be using, on the hardware that you would be using, on the cloud that you would be using. In effect, we are doing a complete restore as part of this. And that's how we're able to tell you, hey, the last time we did this complete restore inside this bubble, it took this long. Why is this important? Well, if you are working with business leaders and you say, yes, we have a RPO or an RTO of 4 hours. Next time you do that test, you'll be able to see, have we actually hit that 4-hour mark? Are we under? Are we over? How do we make sure that we adjust? And I have time for one more question here. CleanDR, Sure Backup. What antivirus programs are supported? So out of the box, we have support for configurations with Semantic Protection Engine, ESET, Windows Defender, as well as Kaspersky V10 and V11. But that's not to say that you can't use other third parties as well. If you go to our Help Center docs, we actually have information in there as far as how you can actually integrate third-party antivirus vendors in with this process. So with that, as we come to a close, I'd like to say thank you all for joining me today as we talked some security best practices. And hopefully you found this information useful, and next steps are make sure that you stay secure. Thanks all.